Zelvana's hands trembled as she watched Daniel disappear through the iron gate, swallowed by the darkness beneath the arena. The crowd still roared, celebrating their champion, but she couldn't hear them anymore. Her mind raced. He's alive. He's here. But something was wrong. The Daniel she knew was full of life, always smiling, always defying the odds with his reckless courage. The man in the arena was different, cold, silent, broken. Vecrin placed a hand on her shoulder. "Princess, we have to move. If the Syndicate finds out who we are, we're dead." Zelvana took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. "We're not leaving without him," she said. Vecrin sighed. "I had a feeling you'd say that." They slipped away from the crowd, moving through the narrow tunnels beneath the arena. The deeper they went, the stronger the stench of blood, sweat, and damp metal became. The prison cells were ahead, rows of iron bars filled with warriors who had lost their fights, groaning in pain or sitting in silence, waiting for their next battle. Zelvana pressed against the wall as two guards passed. Once they were gone, she signaled for her team to move forward. "Find his cell," she whispered. They split up, checking each prisoner. Then she heard it, a low, familiar voice. "I don't fight for you." Her heart clenched. Daniel. She rushed toward the sound and stopped in front of a dimly lit cell. Inside, sitting on the floor, was the man she had searched for all these years. His head was bowed, his arms resting on his knees. His dark hair was longer, unkempt, and his body was covered in scars. He looked like a ghost of the man she once knew. "Daniel," she whispered. Slowly, he lifted his head. His eyes met hers. For a moment, there was nothing, just silence. Then his expression changed. His eyes narrowed, filled with confusion and disbelief. "No," he muttered. "You're not real." Zelvana swallowed the lump in her throat. "It's me," she said, stepping closer. "I found you." Daniel let out a short, bitter laugh. "Took you long enough." Tears burned in her eyes, but she kept her voice steady. "I never stopped looking." Before he could respond, heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Guards. Vecrin cursed. "Princess, we have to go. Now." Zelvana grabbed the cell bars. "We're getting you out of here." Daniel stared at her for a long moment. Then, finally, something changed in his eyes. Hope. A flicker of the man he used to be. A sharp alarm rang through the corridors. The guards had discovered them. Zelvana turned to Vecrin. "Blow the locks." It was time to bring Daniel home. Princess Zelvana stood at the edge of her ship's viewing deck, staring into the vast darkness of space. Stars blinked in the distance, endless and cold. For 5 long years, she had searched. 5 years of chasing rumors, broken leads, and empty signals. But she would not give up. She could not give up. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The memory of him was still fresh in her mind. Captain Daniel Carter, the stubborn, brave, reckless human who had stolen her heart. They were supposed to be together. They had planned everything, leaving politics behind, traveling across the stars, living their own adventure. But then, one night, he was gone. His ship vanished, no distress call, no wreckage, nothing. Her people had told her to move on. "Humans are fragile," they said. "He is gone, princess. Accept it." But Zelvana refused to believe it. She knew Daniel. He was a survivor. If there was even the smallest chance he was alive, she would find him. A soft chime echoed through the ship's command center. Zelvana turned as her lead navigator, Vecrin, hurried toward her. His reptilian scales shimmered under the dim light. "Princess," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "We found something." Zelvana's heart pounded. "What is it?" Vecrin pressed a few buttons on his wrist device, and a holographic map flickered to life. "A distress signal," he said. "Weak, old, but it's human." Zelvana stepped closer, eyes locked on the signal's location. A desolate planet on the outer rim. Rex 9. a place known for its lawlessness. Could it be him? She whispered. Vecren hesitated. We don't know, but it's the first human signal in this sector in years. Zalvanna clenched her fists. She had followed false leads before. She had faced disappointment more times than she could count. But this time, something felt different. She turned sharply. Prepare the ship. We leave immediately. Vecren hesitated. Princess, Rex 9 is dangerous. Pirates, slavers, warlords. I don't care, she snapped. If there's even a chance he's down there, I have to go. Vecren sighed, but nodded. Understood. We'll be ready within the hour. Zalvanna exhaled slowly, her heart racing. Daniel, if you're alive, hold on. I'm coming. She turned back to the stars, determination burning in her chest. The search wasn't over. Not yet. Zalvanna stood in front of the massive metal door, her heart pounding. Behind it was the Syndicate's arena, where prisoners and slaves were forced to fight for survival. If this phantom was truly Daniel, she was about to see him again, for the first time in 5 years. 2 large alien guards stood at the entrance, their armor thick, and their weapons sharp. They eyed her suspiciously. No entry without payment, one growled. Vecren stepped forward, tossing a bag of credits at their feet. This should be enough. The guard opened the bag, counted the credits, and grunted. Go in, but don't cause trouble. The heavy doors groaned open, revealing a dark tunnel lit by flickering lights. The sound of roaring crowds echoed ahead. The Zalvanna swallowed hard and stepped inside, her hands clenched into fists. As they entered the arena stands, the noise grew deafening. Thousands of aliens cheered and screamed, placing bets on the upcoming fight. Below, inside the pit, stood a massive cage. The sand inside was stained dark with blood. A voice boomed through the arena speakers. Now, the fight you've all been waiting for. The undefeated champion of the Syndicate. The legend. The Phantom. A metal gate at the far end of the arena slowly lifted. The lone figure stepped out, his movements slow but powerful. He wore dark, battle-worn armor and a helmet that covered his face. Scars covered his exposed arms, his muscles tense. Zalvanna's breath caught in her throat. It's him. The Phantom. Daniel stood in the center of the arena, silent and still. The crowd roared his name. He didn't react. He just waited. The announcer laughed. And his opponent, the beast of Ralzor Prime, the Crimson Devourer. Another gate slammed open, and a monstrous creature charged out. It had 4 legs, razor-sharp claws, and glowing red eyes. It let out a terrible roar, shaking the arena walls. Zalvanna's heart pounded. Daniel, she whispered. The monster lunged. Daniel moved like lightning. He dodged to the side, rolling under the creature's massive claws. With a single precise strike, he slammed his fist into its side, making it stumble. The crowd screamed in excitement. But Daniel showed no emotion, no fear, no anger. He was a warrior, a machine of survival. Zalvanna's hands trembled. What had they done to him? The fight continued, brutal and intense. Daniel moved with deadly precision, striking weak points, avoiding attacks, and wearing the beast down. In a final blow, he grabbed a fallen blade from the sand and drove it into the monster's skull. The arena exploded in cheers. Daniel stood over the fallen beast, breathing heavily. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back toward the gate. Zalvanna's heart ached. He's alive. But is he still the man I loved? She had found him. Now she had to bring him back. The cold night air of Rex 9 hit them like a slap in the face as they emerged from the tunnel. The bright red sky, lit by distant burning factories, gave the planet a haunting glow. But Zalvanna couldn't afford to look at the horizon. There was no time to waste. Keep moving, Daniel said, his voice low and urgent. He was already scanning the area, his military instincts taking over. His eyes were sharp, focused, But Salvana could still see the weariness in his face, the weight of everything he had endured over the years. They weren't safe yet. Vikrin looked around, his weapon at the ready. We need to reach the ship. The Syndicate's forces will be looking for us by now. They'll send out patrols. Salvana nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant outline of their ship, hidden in a small, rundown docking bay. We can make it. We just need to stick together. Daniel turned to face her, his eyes still distant, as if he wasn't fully present. What happens after we get to your ship? He asked quietly. Salvana took a breath. She had thought about that question 1,000 times in the past 5 years. They would escape. But after that, could she heal the man she loved from the inside out? Could he return to the life they once dreamed of? She shook her head. I don't know, but we'll figure it out. Together. He didn't reply, but his eyes softened for just a moment. And that was enough. They moved quickly, taking narrow alleyways and avoiding the main roads. The sounds of distant sirens and explosions echoed around them, but they pressed on. As they neared the docking bay, they heard voices, Syndicate soldiers patrolling the area. Salvana's heart raced. They couldn't afford to be spotted now. Down, Daniel whispered, pulling her down into a shadowed corner. The rest of the team crouched beside them, hidden in the darkness. The soldiers passed, their boots clanking loudly against the metal ground. They were too close. Salvana held her breath, praying they wouldn't notice the small group of escapees. The soldiers stopped just feet away. One of them glanced in their direction. Salvana's hand reached for the dagger at her side, her pulse quickening. If they were spotted now, there would be no escape. Then, without warning, Daniel stepped forward, his movements fluid and silent. He grabbed the soldier closest to him, pulling him into the shadows before the man could react. With a swift motion, Daniel knocked him out cold. The others didn't even have time to react before he moved to the next soldier, taking him out just as quickly. His hands moved like lightning, years of training and survival instincts kicking in. The remaining soldiers never knew what hit them. When the last one fell, Daniel stood over them, breathing heavily. His eyes were cold again, distant. But there was something else there, too, something like relief. Salvana stepped forward, touching his arm gently. You're still him, she said softly. Daniel didn't look at her, but the tension in his shoulders eased slightly. I don't know what I am anymore, he muttered. But I do know one thing. What's that? Salvana asked, her voice hopeful. We're not done yet. We're just getting started. And for the first time in years, Salvana felt a spark of hope inside her chest. Maybe they could survive this after all. Maybe they could find a way back to the life they had once dreamed of. The underground tunnels of the Syndicate's prison were dark and narrow, filled with smoke and the stench of burning metal. The alarms blared louder, warning every guard in the complex that prisoners were escaping. Salvana gripped Daniel's wrist tightly as they ran through the passageways. Her heart pounded, but she didn't let fear slow her down. She had fought too hard to find him. She wouldn't lose him again. Behind them, Vikrin fired his plasma pistol, holding off the guards. Keep moving, he shouted. We don't have much time. Daniel stumbled slightly, but Salvana steadied him. His body was strong, his movements sharp, but she could tell he wasn't at full strength. Too many years of fighting in the arena, of being pushed to his limits, had taken a toll. A sudden explosion shook the tunnel ahead, throwing them off balance. Flames erupted from a broken pipe, blocking their path. Vikrin cursed. They're trying to trap us. Daniel turned, scanning the area. There's another way, he muttered, his mind working like the soldier he once was. He pointed to a maintenance shaft on the wall. That leads to the upper levels. We can get out from there. Salvana nodded. Then let's go. Daniel moved forward and gripped the heavy metal door of the shaft. With a grunt, he pulled it open. The passage inside was narrow, barely big enough for one person at a time. I'll go first, he said. Make sure it's safe. Salvana frowned. We do this together, remember. Daniel paused, then gave a small nod before climbing inside. One by one, they crawled through the dark tunnel, the sounds of chaos fading behind them. The metal was cold beneath Sylvana's hands as she moved forward. The space was tight, and for a moment, the silence felt suffocating. Then, Daniel's voice broke the quiet. "Why did you come for me?" Sylvana's breath hitched. She had dreamed of this moment for years, finally being able to tell him, to make him understand. "Because I love you," she said softly, "and because I knew you were alive. No matter what anyone said, I never stopped believing in you." There was a pause, then a small sigh. "I don't know if I'm the same person anymore," Daniel admitted. "I've done things, terrible things to survive." Sylvana's voice was gentle but firm. "You are still you, Daniel, and you are not alone anymore." Before he could respond, the tunnel shook violently. Vecren cursed. "They're breaching the lower levels. We have to move faster." Daniel gritted his teeth and pushed forward. After a few more agonizing minutes, they reached the end of the passage. With one strong kick, Daniel knocked the exit open, revealing the open night sky of Rex 9. Freedom. Sylvana took a deep breath of fresh air. They had made it this far, but the fight wasn't over yet. The Syndicate would not let their champion go so easily. Rex 9 was nothing like the beautiful worlds Sylvana had visited before. It was a dying planet, dark, dusty, and dangerous. The sky was a dull red, covered in thick clouds of smoke from the factories that burned day and night. The ground below was cracked, filled with broken buildings and abandoned ships. Sylvana stood at the ship's entrance, wearing a dark cloak over her royal armor. She had to hide her identity. If the warlords of Rex 9 knew that a Zetharian princess was here, they would try to capture her for ransom. She could not take that risk. Vecren and two of her best fighters stood beside her. "We should be careful, Princess," Vecren warned. "This planet is home to criminals, slavers, and bounty hunters." Sylvana nodded. "Then we won't waste time." The small group moved through the city streets, blending in with the crowds of traders and mercenaries. The air smelled of oil and rust, and the voices around them spoke in dozens of different alien languages. She pulled up her wrist device and checked the signal. It was weak but steady. It led them deeper into the city, toward an underground market known as the Hollow. They walked down a long tunnel, passing guards with metal-plated armor and weapons. The Hollow was filled with strange lights, holograms advertising illegal goods, and creatures from all across the galaxy. Sylvana kept her hood low as she listened carefully. She needed information. She needed to know if a human had been seen here. At a small bar, an old trader sat alone, drinking a dark liquid. His skin was green and rough like tree bark. Sylvana approached him and placed a few credits on the table. "I'm looking for someone," she said. "A human." The trader looked up, his yellow eyes studying her. "Humans are rare here," he said, "but there is one." Sylvana's breath caught in her throat. "Where?" The trader leaned forward. "They call him the Phantom. He fights in the Syndicate's arena." "The Syndicate," Vecren muttered. "Not good." Sylvana ignored him. "This Phantom, where can I find him?" The trader pointed toward a massive metal door across the market. "The fights start in 1 hour. If you want to see him, you'd better hurry." Sylvana grabbed a handful of extra credits and tossed them on the table. Then, without another word, she turned and marched toward the arena entrance. Her heart was pounding. The Phantom. Could it be Daniel? She didn't know, but she was about to find out. The sound of alarms echoed throughout the underground prison, bouncing off the cold steel walls. Sylvana's heart raced as she heard the pounding footsteps of the approaching guards. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. Vecren nodded, stepping forward with a small handheld device in his hand. He pressed a button, and the thick metal door of Daniel's cell blasted open with a deafening sound. The prisoners inside nearby cells turned, their eyes wide with surprise. But Salvanha didn't have time to waste on them. She rushed forward, grabbing Daniel's arm. "Come on," she urged. "We're getting you out of here." Daniel didn't move at first. He just sat there, his eyes distant, as if he didn't fully believe what was happening. The years of fighting and surviving had hardened him, and he had learned to trust no one, not even himself. As Salvanha pulled him up with force, her voice firm. "I'm not leaving without you. We don't have time to argue." His eyes finally met hers. For a split second, there was a flicker of recognition, a momentary connection, but then the harsh reality of their situation returned. "You're wasting your time," Daniel said in a low voice. "They'll never let me go. I'm not the same man you knew." Salvanha's heart clenched. She knew it was true. The Daniel she remembered. The one who laughed and joked, the one who fought for something bigger than himself, was gone. But that didn't mean he couldn't come back. "You're wrong," she said firmly. "You're still him. You're still the man I love." Daniel looked away, his jaw clenched tight. "Love, I'm a weapon now, princess, a killer. That's all I am." Salvanha's grip tightened on his arm. "No, you're not a killer. You're a survivor. And we're getting out of here together. I promise." Before Daniel could respond, the sound of running guards grew louder. They were coming for them. Vikrin raised his weapon and fired at the guards blocking the tunnel ahead. "Hurry," he shouted. Salvanha pushed Daniel forward, leading the way through the winding corridors. They moved quickly, knowing that every second brought them closer to being caught. But even with their fast pace, the guards weren't far behind. A loud crash echoed down the hallway as one of the guards fired a blast, narrowly missing them. The fight had begun. Daniel instinctively stepped in front of Salvanha, blocking the incoming shots. His training kicked in, even after all this time. He dodged the blasts with ease, his movements swift and calculated. But his eyes were still filled with doubt. "Why are you doing this?" he asked through gritted teeth. "Because I'm not leaving you behind," Salvanha replied. "We're in this together, Daniel. Always." They reached a small hatch at the end of the corridor. Vikrin worked quickly, punching in the code to open it. The door slid open just as the first wave of guards rounded the corner. "Go," Vikrin shouted. With no time to think, Salvanha grabbed Daniel's hand and pulled him through the hatch. The moment they were through, the door slammed shut behind them, sealing them off from the Syndicate's soldiers. Salvanha looked up at Daniel, her breath coming in quick gasps. His face was still hard, still distant, but he was alive. And now they had a chance. She gave him a determined look. "We're not done yet. We're getting out of this place, Daniel. Together." For the first time in years, Daniel didn't pull away. He nodded, the tiniest flicker of hope in his eyes. Together. And for the first time since his capture, he believed it. The quiet hum of the ship's engines was a welcome sound after the chaos of the last few hours. Salvanha stood at the cockpit, her hands gripping the controls, her eyes focused on the horizon. The sky of Rex 9 was burning, red and angry, but it was behind them now. Ahead, the stars beckoned. Freedom was within their grasp. But something still gnawed at her, the weight of what lay ahead, the unknown. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching her. His presence was like a shadow, always there but never fully present. His eyes were distant, cold, as if he was still somewhere else, somewhere back in that dark arena, fighting for survival. Salvanha didn't turn to him immediately. She couldn't. Not when the past still held such a tight grip on him. "Is it safe?" Vikrin asked from the back of the ship, his voice breaking the silence. Salvanha nodded, still looking out the window. "For now. We've made it this far. But we're not out of danger yet." The journey to their next destination wasn't going to be easy. They had the Syndicate on their tail, and even if they outran them, Salvanha knew that Daniel's presence on her ship made them a target. The Syndicate would never stop hunting him, and by extension, her. What happens next? Daniel asked, his voice low and filled with doubt. He had been quiet for the last few minutes, and Exalvana knew he had been thinking, wrestling with the choices he had made. She turned to face him now, her expression soft. We find a place where we can lay low. I have allies who can help us. Daniel's eyes darkened. And then what? You think you can fix me? Turn me back into the man I was? Exalvana took a deep breath. I don't know if I can fix you, Daniel. I can't promise that everything will be the same, but I can promise that you're not alone anymore. We'll face this together. Daniel seemed to study her for a long moment, his gaze intense. Then he finally stepped forward. I don't need fixing, he muttered. I just need to survive. Exalvana met his gaze, her heart pounding. She had never been afraid of the battles ahead, never afraid of the dangers of the galaxy. But this was different. We'll survive, she said, her voice steady. But we have to keep moving forward. There's no turning back now. The ship's engines roared to life as she punched in the coordinates. The stars outside blurred into streaks of light as they made the jump toward speed. As they flew through the endless black of space, Exalvana stole a glance at Daniel. He was staring out the window, lost in thought. She could tell he was still battling the ghosts of his past, the things he had done, the things he had lost. But in that moment, Exalvana knew one thing for certain. No matter what happened, they weren't going to let the past define them. They had a chance to rebuild, to survive, to fight for a new future, together. And as the stars streaked by, she whispered softly, more to herself than to anyone else, we'll find our way. But deep down, she knew they were not alone in this fight. Not anymore. You said. The ship floated in the vast darkness of space, far from Syndicate territory. The only sound inside was the quiet hum of the engines. They had escaped, at least for now. Exalvana sat in the cockpit, staring out at the stars. She should have felt relieved, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The Syndicate wouldn't forget. They would hunt them across the galaxy if they had to. But it didn't matter. She had Daniel back. That was all that mattered. She turned to look at him. He stood near the viewport, watching the stars with a strange expression. It wasn't fear or anger. It was something else. Something softer. You're free now, Exalvana said quietly. Daniel let out a slow breath. I don't even know what that means anymore. He turned to face her. For years, I only thought about surviving, fighting. Now, what do I do? She stepped closer. You live. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. And how do I do that? Exalvana reached out, taking his hand in hers, one step at a time. For a moment, Daniel didn't move. Then, slowly, he tightened his fingers around hers. It was a small gesture, but to Exalvana, it meant everything. Vekrin walked into the cockpit, clearing his throat. We should decide where to go next. Laying low won't be easy. Exalvana nodded. I have allies. There's a station in the Outer Rim, run by people who hate the Syndicate as much as we do. They can help us. Vekrin crossed his arms. And after that? Exalvana looked at Daniel. That's up to him. Daniel was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice steady. I don't want to run forever. I know the Syndicate. I know how they work. If we don't stop them, they'll keep destroying lives, taking people, turning them into slaves and fighters. Exalvana's heart pounded. Are you saying? Daniel exhaled. I think it's time we take the fight to them. Vekrin let out a low whistle. That's a dangerous path. Daniel smirked slightly. So is running. He looked at Exalvana. I don't want revenge, but I don't want anyone else to suffer the way I did. If we can stop them, even a little, I want to try. Exalvana smiled, pride swelling in her chest. The man she had loved, the warrior, the leader, the fighter, was still there. Then we do it together, she said. Daniel nodded. together. Xalvanna turned to the controls and set their course. The stars stretched before them, endless and full of possibility. This wasn't the end of their journey. It was only the beginning. The ship sped through hyperspace, leaving Rex 9 far behind. The Xalvanna sat in the cockpit, watching the glowing lines of light outside. For the first time in years, she had Daniel back. But the battle wasn't over. Daniel stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed, staring at the navigation screen. His body was here, but his mind was somewhere else. Vecrin walked in, checking his weapon. "We need to talk," he said, looking at Xalvanna. She nodded, standing up. "What is it?" "The Syndicate won't stop hunting us," Vecrin said. "Daniel was their champion. They won't let him go that easily. We need to be ready." Daniel let out a bitter chuckle. "Of course, they won't stop. I know how they think. They own me, or at least they think they do." He turned to Xalvanna. "This isn't over. They'll keep coming." Xalvanna met his gaze. "Then we fight." Daniel shook his head. "You don't understand. I've seen what they do to people who run. They don't just kill them. They make examples of them." His voice was heavy, filled with memories of pain and bloodshed. Xalvanna stepped closer, her eyes determined. "You are not alone anymore, Daniel. You don't have to run alone. We will face them together." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then, an alarm beeped. Vecrin cursed. "Incoming ships. Syndicate warships. They tracked us." Xalvanna's heart pounded. "How long until they reach us?" 2 minutes, Vecrin replied. "We don't have enough firepower to fight them directly." Daniel's expression hardened. "Then we outsmart them." He moved quickly to the control panel, typing in commands. "I know how they operate. They'll try to disable us first, then board. But if we overload the ship's reactor for just a few seconds, we can create an energy pulse. It'll knock out their sensors long enough for us to escape." Xalvanna frowned. "That's dangerous." Daniel looked at her, his eyes steady. "So is staying here and waiting to die." She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Do it." The ship's lights flickered as Daniel activated the reactor overload. The engines whined, and a deep rumble filled the ship. Outside, the Syndicate ships closed in. Then, boom! A massive energy pulse exploded from their ship, sending shockwaves through space. The Syndicate warships shuddered as their systems went dark. "Now," Daniel shouted. Xalvanna pushed the controls forward, sending the ship into a steep dive. The engines roared, and in a blink, they vanished into hyperspace, leaving the Syndicate behind. The silence that followed was deafening. Vecrin let out a breath. That was close. Xalvanna turned to Daniel. He was breathing hard, but for the first time, there was something in his eyes she hadn't seen in years. Hope. They had won this battle. But the war wasn't over yet.